So there's another concerning realisation that I've come to actually now that I've actually read that Blackstone's Guide to the Human Rights Act 1998, particularly on this Article 8 when it comes to the right to privacy in the family, right? The tests for that are that there's got to be a pressing, urgent social need and there can't be an ulterior motive, right? Now, after the Big Brother program, which basically the basis of the program is to observe, watch, and spy on people within their own houses, right? And ironically, that program came to fruition and got put out on the mainstream TV and put into people's consciousnesses literally very shortly after the 1998 Human Rights Act was made. It was 2000, so, and actually it started a little bit before 2000 because they started it in other countries first, right? So, and, as now we've been having the pandemic and things happening here, like 2 years is basically, it shows how things can happen in a number of years and be connected, or events in sort of sequential order which have like a connection or cause and effect. So, on that basis, I think that the Big Brother program, following on from 1998 with the Human Rights Act, it is significant. But this is the thing. I think, therefore, there are other things which Tony Blair introduced which also are going to go against that act as well. In fact, the whole aim of everything the government's doing, I strongly believe, are completely and totally against the Human Rights Act 1998 articles, and they're really a red herring and a test, because you can't have those if you have that China government. You can't have any of those articles. Now, what I wanted to mention in this video, what the point of this video is about, is that I've got a complaint with Manchester Police at the moment, and, I know a lot of people complain to the police of professional standards and don't get anywhere, even when they try their hardest, right? And I complained to the police, way back when I was getting prosecuted illegally, and they didn't really do anything about it. So, why would I bother now? Well, I've in a way, they want to defeat your ability and stop you from trying, right? There's a whole area of discussion we can go into that, and also, well, actually, I'll try and just brief on it now. Like, for example, that DC Carl Davis in Runcorn, who wouldn't he wouldn't take on the case, he wouldn't properly investigate the case or pursue it for the election offences. And also Graham Moore reported it to the police as well, and they wouldn't pursue it. So it wasn't just me, other people had reported it as well, and the police didn't pursue it. And now we've got to the stage where, Graham Moore is waiting for the outcome of his case if they're going to hold an election again, and that will prove that something actually was wrong. But they didn't deliver. Apparently there was some of the flyers that didn't get delivered. Now, that is very, very important for the promotion of it, and that should actually call off the election and that to have it redone again, because he didn't actually get promoted, and that is the really important point with like Nigel Farage is getting excess promotion, right? Like we was talking Pints programme, and then other people aren't getting their flyers delivered properly that are supposed to go out, right? So how can the election be fair if one of the candidates didn't get some of their designated flyers weren't delivered, which were required to be delivered, right? That's really important. But so that they're only calling it out apparently on the counting of the tickets and to having a recount, right? Which I don't think is fair if he didn't get some of his flyers delivered, because that's actually probably more important than the ticket counting, Now, Davis, there was a bit of information about this PC Cal Davis, and he had caught these two criminals who've been going around North Wales doing cowboy builders, but like quite, con men cowboy builders. Now, the police like to I think the police have got a certain general intelligence level, right? And they like to catch these criminals out, these kind of like these cowboy criminals who go about conning the public, And when the police catch these bad guys and they use intelligence to outsmart them, I think the police detectives like it. And they kind of like feel that they've achieved something and outsmarted these con men, They're like common criminals. They've outsmarted them. They were trying to con the public, right? But the thing is, when you're getting into things like Nigel Farage and election offences and things like that, it's even more cleverer criminals and more higher up criminals, right? Even smarter. And because the police haven't detected it, or the police didn't notice it or didn't realise it, in a way they failed, right? So I don't think that the public the police like the members of the public coming along and actually reporting things or getting the police to do things that actually, the police had failed in doing or hadn't identified or didn't know, because they're actually being better than the police. They're actually exceeding the standards of the police and kind of like outdoing them in a way, right, to call it out. And I don't really think the police like being outsmarted or outdone. So what they do is they just lie and they refuse to follow it. And also, if the police hadn't caught that out and it was such a massive thing and such a big deal, then it makes the police look incompetent at a national level, and I don't think they want to look incompetent, so they just mug you off and they don't take it on, right? There's some of that going on, but also the police are meant to actually be directly accountable to the public reports, like in the 1800s with when we had the police, you just go to the sheriff counter when there wasn't a police force, when there was just like the sheriff and then his kind of like he had the under sheriff and the bailiffs and so forth. This is when there was a lot more public participation, and you get the warrant, and then you get the police to arrest someone, and then you get them prosecuted. You have to pay the money up front to get it done, or get the warrant, or you could go arrest them yourself once you got the warrant on you yourself from the sheriff who'd issued it, right? But it's not like that anymore. It's like they've got all these constables, sergeants, inspectors, superintendents, and it's a military rank and file organisation. They're under command of these higher up officers, and I don't think they like the public coming along and taking the initiative or the directive in actually directing and instructing the police what to do in a way that can take the command chain from the police, because then you're actually you've got control and command of them and telling them what to do, and I don't think that they like that. So if you uncover some really serious crime like Farage and talking pints, cheating when it's making him excessively more popular, and then you've got other there are other things as well, but I just wanted to put that in as well, because that's actually a problem with the police themselves, and the police as a body now and a regime, rather than just a service that the public can use and are there to perform functions. Now they're kind of like under their own. They've got their own political kind of like agenda and direction. But anyway, so going back to the public participation and like if they're complaining through professional standards, right? So with this Paul Golding case with his van that got seized illegally, the police are definitely prosecuting us illegally against our rights, which is a contempt, right? But they've been doing it against the protesters because they're not being taught the law properly. And it is definitely fair trial impossible when it comes to the police and the CPS. The origins of the CPS in 1985 is, ever since then, it's become a group of colleagues and a body, you know. If the police are just hiring solicitors or hiring their own lawyers kind of randomly, or they've got certain lawyers who just work for them now and again, or whatever, different barristers, KC, depending on their skills and speciality in area of law, right? If a barrister does an illegal prosecution and breaks the law, right, and it's a contempt, and if he gets prosecuted and he's just from a chamber, you know, like a chamber that has, you know, one or two barristers working there, if it's him who does it wrong, it doesn't really affect any of the other barristers, right? But when you get something like the Crown Prosecution Service, which is a body and an organisation, and they're working together, and they're working on offences and crimes together, and they are in a unit, and then they've got, you know, like a chief crown prosecutor, and they're actually a body and an organisation. Now, if that organisation prosecutes people illegally when it's not meant to, it's not just one solicitor or barrister, you know, it's not just like, you know, Mr. Dowsett or whatever from Leicestershire CPS who is at fault. It's like, you know, they've all been working together, right? They've all been working together on it, and they've all been not doing it for a long time. So it's the whole organisation which is in the wrong. You know, it's a group effort. Now, there are some rules in the CPS and police where it says you've got to protect the organisation and services from becoming corrupt, right? But they've actually ended up just protecting themselves and stopping themselves from becoming prosecuted or from being criminalised. And they're actually defending and protecting their staff and their own interests. They're not protecting the services from running corruptly. So there's definitely something in that which needs to sort of be talked about as well. Now, on the matter of you know, Paul Golding and so forth, you see, he wasn't acting in his own personal capacity as a citizen when he was doing the Britain First campaign and advertising, you know, opposing Keir Starmer. He was acting on behalf of his party as a body and the people whose interest in the party that he was acting on, and the people who'd paid for the funding of the party and sponsored it and the members and so forth, right? And the police did not recognise that when they should have done. That they're not recognising people when they act in a capacity as a body, right, as opposed to acting in the capacity of a private individual. And I'm having this argument with Manchester Police at the moment. Now, while we're doing this, and while I'm arguing with Manchester Police, and they started to take on my complaint, and now they're trying to lie and say that, you know, I don't qualify because I'm not a victim yet. You know, I've been sponsoring a party, or other people have been sponsoring a party, and you know, you're a victim. You know, if your monies are affected, right? And I only actually decided to help Britain First out of investigatory purposes and processes and procedures, right? So I'm kind of like following and supporting the party now as part of an investigation, right? It's like a legal road signage investigation, you know? If you don't, you know, you've got to engage in the processes in order to investigate them, right? You know? Now, so the police are reluctant to want to admit that, you know, they've committed contempt because, you know, it makes the whole force look bad. And then the same principle applies to protests and demonstrations as well as not just political parties, right, in their canvassing. So, and a lot of police forces have been acting unlawfully. So we're really holding the professional standards to account now. But Graham Moore said that, you know, the IOPC, the new independent police organisation, apparently a lot of them are on police pensions, and they're all, some of them are, a large proportion of them, or like a majority of them, are actually, they previously worked in the police force, right? So they might have friends and colleagues in the police, and they've got a connection to the police. So what I'm saying is, How can it truly be independent if many of the people who work there used to work in the police force? It can't be independent. If your majority of people who work there used to work in the police force, right, then they can't be impartial, can they? Because some of them have got connections to the police. So that's not impartiality, is it? Now, so I don't think the police can be trusted to investigate themselves, and I don't think that the professional standards take it seriously. And then, if you go on to the Independent Police Commission, then the IOPC, they're going to be biased. They can't possibly be impartial if they work for the police. And then your next line of inquiry is to go to the Ombudsman. But the Ombudsman processes, if it's just how you were treated by the police yourself, in one instance, I don't think it's too bad with the Ombudsman. But in more serious cases, when there's more other authorities involved, like with my case, when it was, the local council and the police and the CPS, they want you to do the complaints all separate, which is kind of a bit annoying when it's just one complaint which involved multiple authorities. And then after you've submitted your complaints separately, they make correlations and put two and two together behind the scenes anyway, the Ombudsman. So, why would you submit them separate if they were just going to try and link cases and connections together afterwards? Why don't you submit them as one linked case, and then you're doing the work for them? You're making the connections for them, right? So don't like how the Ombudsman is doing it at the moment. Now, I started this talk by wanting to talk about the Human Rights Act, right? I've talked about different aspects of the Human Rights Act recently in other videos, but because of, I've been filling in police complaint forms and I am familiar with them anyway. And when you get to the end of these police complaint forms, now they've got all these questionnaires. Now, this is why I've got this picture up here of this question. It's just like a random image that I looked for on Google, but it represents a random police questionnaire, right? Now, ever since, I guess I never really filled police complaints forms in before 2013, right? So that was sort of after Tony Blair. But when I first, had to start filling police complaint forms in, because of, I'd started to do that illegal road signage investigation, I got very familiar with them, and I was always curious, why have they got these strange questionnaire forms always about questioning you about your gender and sexuality, and if you're bisexual or not, or what's your religion, and all these other things, right? And when you're complaining, right, you're not being prosecuted by the police. You are, you're making a complaint about the police and about their conduct, right? So you're complaining about the police. So it's not actually about you, right? It's not about you. The complaint's about the police, right? You yourself aren't the subject of the complaint. It's you might have been, you might have suffered from the police, right? But just because you've suffered from the police doesn't necessarily mean that, you have to tell them everything about your private or personal life. I mean, if you got hit by the police, why does it matter what your sexuality is or anything like that, right? When it's the police officer's conduct that is under investigation or under scrutiny, that the police officer's conducting an investigation, right? What does it matter about your personal, private, family, business or religions? And, if a police officer arrested you illegally or hit you or punched you, why does it matter what your religion is? Unless it was actually occurred at a Sikh temple or something like that, or you're arrested for praying, or you were arrested for praying outside a clinic. You don't want to know what your religion is, right? If you were arrested for praying outside a clinic and you were saying that I shouldn't have been arrested, it's against the Human Rights Act or whatever. But if you were gonna claim that, you would be actually trying to get a court to say that, what the police did infringed on your right to practice a religion, and then it would be incompatible with convention right, and then you were trying to prove that, get the whole law sent back to Parliament to be scrapped by a judge, and then everyone would be able to do that. But no one's doing that. No one's actually getting the Human Rights Act in effect to challenge like praying outside a clinic and saying it's incompatible with the right to practice the religion, because then if they did that, the legislation would be changed and there wouldn't be any of those prosecutions, right? So the police aren't using it for that in that scenario at all. Now, this is where we're going back to earlier on, and I hope I haven't like confused you or kind of like, been too kind of random in my things that I've thrown into this that I just wanted to mention. Now, the Human Rights Act book, the Blackstone's book, which has got the tests for the right to privacy, there's got to be an urgent pressing social need, and there can't be any ulterior motives. Now, I think the police form completely violates the Human Rights Act 1998 on privacy, because if you are just a person who got involved in a police incident, and you're complaining against how the police conducted themselves, right? There's no urgent pressing social need for the police to be asking you all these personal private questions about your own private life, like your gender, if you're gay, straight or bisexual, right? Unless the police officer kind of like, had sex with you or something like that. That woman, there was a woman, a protester woman, a hippie woman, I think she was, who undercover police officer investigated her and had a child with her and pretended that he was like, her partner. And he did get, I think he did get legal action against him and she got compensation for that. That's an example, But obviously, if she had sex with a police officer and he was undercover, and she was a woman and he was a man, and there wasn't anyone else involved, why would they need to ask questions if she was bisexual or not? Because it was clearly obvious that, she was at least heterosexual, or else she wouldn't have had sex with him, right? Unless she was forced to against her will, right? But wouldn't that be in the normal line of questioning? And to be honest, if the police officer did or did not actually do this, then why we're questioning his conduct, what he did or what he didn't do, right? Now, if it wasn't a incident that had anything to do with sex at all, what your sexuality is, why would you be given a questionnaire to ask what your sexuality is? Why would they want to survey it? And I don't know how long they keep those records and reports and information on people, because like a lot of records now the police only keep for a certain amount of time, right? So that there are plenty of questions on there which are gonna not have much relevance or very rarely have much relevance. And there's definitely, but the thing is, even whether or not they assisted the investigation or not, if the police really needed to know that, wouldn't they ask them that in their normal line of questioning, right? Rather than it being some strange questionnaire at the end of everything that could potentially, in most cases, be completely irrelevant to the matters, but they're trying to get you to fill it in and get the information anyway. Now, that has no urgent pressing or social need to it. And I think there is an ulterior motive, is to get the data. That it's like you're doing a police complaints process and they're giving you a strange questionnaire at the end, which is completely and totally invasive of private and personal information on sex, race, gender, religion. Actually, all of the articles of the Human Rights Act are pretty much covered in there, right? And it's completely and totally, there's no urgent pressing social need for it, right? Now, if there's a legal need for it, a legal need is in legal proceedings, right? If there is a legal need to know your sexuality because you had a sexual incident with a police officer, then the question of your sexuality will be required to be asked by the police as part of their investigations, right? That's part of police questioning. Now, that's a legal need, right? But if there isn't, if it wasn't involving a sexual thing, there's no legal need for it, right? Now, there's no pressing, urgent social need for the police to be collecting all this private data on people, because, if they had all this data on everyone, then it wouldn't be private anymore, would it, right? And I know that it's voluntary. That form at the end is purely voluntary. But why would you be coercing or trying to persuade many people to fill in? And many people just, who are quite naive, fill the form in and just fill it in naively, I just don't answer those questions now, because they're irrelevant, and I think there is an ulterior motive. Well, there is. We'll question whether there's an ulterior motive or not, right? Firstly, right, is it a legal requirement for the investigation? If it's not a legal requirement for the investigation, is this not a legal need for it in that investigation, right? Then why would you be asking for it? So it seems like if it's for something else, that's ulterior. Well, what is that something else? What are they doing with us data and statistics and so forth? Why it's meant to be illegal for the police to enter and access the police system for their own personal private use, to find out information about persons. That's illegal. But that information might be on there for a short period of time. We don't know who else is accessing the police system, And when we get into this area of Tony Blair, when he's been the Prime Minister, he's very high up in the government, he's in with all these World Health Organisations, the World Economic Forum, all these high-level computer boffins who can just click their fingers like the Anonymous and have access to everything, freedom of information. If you were a criminal mastermind and a genius, and you wanted to perv into people's private business, you would set up your government and police force with all these ridiculous questions, which there was no urgent social need for, because you wanted to find out all these things. How do the police know that while they've got them on record, that Tony Blair doesn't go on his computer at home, hack into it, collect all the data, and then he's got it, and then when the police delete it, then it's gone. But he's got it all, right? And that's been stored somewhere in Mark Zuckerberg or Bill Gates' underground defence bunker, and then whenever Tony Blair or any of his elite social mates want to go and have a bisexual adventure, they can find out we've got a list of all the people who are bisexual in England, because the police collected all the data, right? How do you know that? You don't know that. And actually the court system, there was serious problems with the court system. There were serious problems with that Royal Mail system. The black belt barrister and Alan from Coach House Chambers, the barrister who teaches barristers, he made a video about, a lot of information from the courts wasn't getting to the judges, right? There was some serious flaws and errors in the software. In fact, in the legal system, everyone's data did get compromised. There was a big data breach of people's information from the court records, actually, as well, a few years before that. So that means that it's compromisable, and they did that with the... So that means that what I've just explained about the police is possible, Why do they want all this obsession with, sexuality, gender, as if they're doing some kind of survey or things like that, the police... And it always, whenever I very first saw that form, I always thought that I was uncomfortable with it. There was something very strange and intrusive and wrong with it. Obviously, almost like they're obsessed with sex. And then when you find out that story about the undercover police officer who, did actually have a sexual relationship with someone he was investigating, it's very concerning. So what I'm saying is, I actually think these police questionnaire forms at the end are illegal. I actually think they're violating the Human Rights Act on the right to privacy, because there's definitely not an urgent, pressing social need for them at all. And there isn't a legal need for them in all cases. If you fill that complete form in on your private information, in many percentage of instances of cases, that information is not actually needed. So there isn't a legal need for it. It's optional anyway, right? If it was a legal requirement, it wouldn't be optional. If a police officer needed to establish your sexuality in order to be able to prosecute, a police officer or anyone, they would ask you the question under legal questioning. It wouldn't be, like voluntarily, and definitely they wouldn't just throw those questions in anyway if that case had nothing to do with that, right? If they're questioning you on an incident at a synagogue or a church, right? Asking you your religion would be logical in the line of inquiry, right? But there's absolutely no interest or reason to ask you what your sexuality is in that instance. So why are they asking people in these questionnaires, right? That's got to have that has an ulterior motive to the aims and objectives of the investigation, right? For sure. So this is completely and totally illegal. And how it popped up and how it appeared and the time it was introduced, following I don't think that they had those type of strange questionnaires before the Tony Blair government, right? It's, again, making private and personal information about us freely available to the police of every single person who complains to them on their records, right? And it rings, it's got a ring or a chime with Tony Blair's ideology of freedom of information, right? But, it's not meant to be freedom of our information, because that's why we've got Article 8 to protect our private and personal information. We're meant to have freedom of information of the government, how many prosecutions, did you do on in August of 2025, right? That's freedom of information. It's not personal information about any of the officers in their own personal life, right? It's purely a government information about government. It's not. I'm not asking where the police officer went on Tuesday at 4 o'clock in after he's clocked out, I'm not asking the police officer, how many women he's had sex with, I'm not asking the police officer, how many times he's been married or anything like that. That's his own personal life. That's not government information, right? But what's happening is the police are asking us those type of questions. I'm quite surprised that it doesn't say on there, like how many people have you had sex with or whatever, and, how many times you've been married. That form might as well have those questions, in context of the other questions. There's some very strange and peculiar questions on there. And this obsession with gender, this is the type of thing that Joyland Moore is doing in under the Human Rights Act, all these strange gender cases and gender rights. But it gets into your head. No one even really thinks about gender that much, but after... It was the police forms that were obsessing over gender and had a very strange